Some horror stories don't feel frightening in the moment. They feel calm, quiet, unreal. Tonight, you will hear 10 true American horror stories that felt unreal while they were happening. Moments where reality slowly stopped making sense. Story 1. 40-mile loop. I still check my odometer every time I pass that exit. Every single time. Because what happened on Highway 89 that night broke something fundamental in how I understand reality. And I need to know the numbers still work the way they were supposed to. It started as the most boring drive of my life. 300 miles of nothing between Flagstaff and home. Straight through the Arizona desert on a Tuesday night in October. I am a long-haul truck dispatcher, 42 years old, and they've driven that route maybe 200 times. The road is so familiar, it's like muscle memory. You could blindfold me and I know every curve, every rise, every sad little town that blinks past in the darkness. But that night, something changed. The first strange thing happened at mile marker 247. I noticed it because I'd been watching the markers tick by, using them to stay awake. The digital clock on my dashboard read 11:43 p.m. The highway stretched ahead in a perfect line, my headlights cutting through the emptiness. No other cars, no moon. Just that endless ribbon of asphalt and the creeping shadows of desert scrub on either side. Then I saw the gas station. Now, I knew every gas station on this route. There were exactly 4 between Flagstaff and home, and I could pass the last one 30 miles back. But there it stood, bathed in sickly yellow light, an old-style pump island with a small attached building. The kind you don't see anymore. The kind that disappeared in the 80s. I wasn't low on gas, but something pulled me in anyway. Maybe curiosity. Maybe that unsettling feeling that was already crawling up my spine, whispering that something wasn't quite right. The station was completely silent. No attendant. No other vehicles. The pumps looked ancient, with mechanical number wheels instead of digital displays. I got out of my car, and the night swallowed every sound. Even my footsteps seemed muted, distant, like I was hearing them through water. The air felt wrong. Too still. Too warm for October in the desert, where nights drop into the 40s. This felt like summer heat, thick and pressing against my skin. The fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency that made my teeth ache. I tried the pump. It wouldn't work without payment, so I walked toward the building. Through the grimy window, I could see a figure behind the counter. Just standing there, not moving. When I pushed open the door, a bell should have chimed. Nothing made a sound. The man behind the counter was old, maybe 70, with skin like dried leather and eyes that didn't quite focus on me. He wore a uniform that might have been blue once but had faded to something closer to gray. A name tag read, Earl, in letters so worn they were barely visible. Pump 4, I said, pulling out my wallet. He didn't respond, didn't move, just stared at a spot slightly to my left. That's when I noticed the calendar on the wall behind him. August 1985. My hands started shaking. This wasn't nostalgia or vintage decoration. Everything in that store was from 1985. The products on the shelves, the prices, the brands that didn't exist anymore. A rack of cassette tapes, a display of road maps. Even the register was an old mechanical model with a pull handle. Sir, my voice came out smaller than I intended. Sir, how much for the gas? Earl. His head turned toward me, slow and mechanical, like something rusty coming to life. His mouth opened, but what came out wasn't quite a voice. It was more like an echo of a voice, distant and hollow. You shouldn't stop here. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in clouds. The lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, I saw that Earl's shadow on the wall behind him was wrong. It didn't match his body. It was stretched and twisted, reaching up toward the ceiling with fingers that were far too long. I ran. I didn't look back, just sprinted to my car and threw myself inside. My hands fumbled with the keys. The engine turned over, and I floored it, tires screaming as I pulled back onto the highway. In my rearview mirror, the gas station vanished. Not gradually, not fading into the distance. It simply wasn't there anymore, like it had been erased from existence. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was breathing too fast, on the edge of hyperventilating. I forced myself to slow down, to think rationally. Maybe I'd been drowsy. Maybe I dreamed it, some kind of micro-sleep while driving. That happens, right? Your brain creates entire scenarios in seconds. but my odometer had moved. I'd driven exactly 2 miles from where I'd seen the station. I checked the mile markers as they passed. 249, 250, 251. The numbers climbed normally, reassuringly. I started to calm down. Just a weird experience. Exhaustion playing tricks. I could get home, sleep it off, laugh about it tomorrow. Then I passed mile marker 247 again. Same marker, same exact spot, but I'd been driving forward, watching the numbers increase. I'd gone from 251 back to 247 without turning around, without the road curving back on itself. The fear that hit me then was different from the gas station. This was deeper, more primal. This was the terrifying realization that the rules I built my entire understanding of reality on were breaking down. I kept driving. Mile marker 248, then 249, then 250, then 251, then 247 again. I was caught in a loop, 40 miles of highway, repeating endlessly. The same stretch of desert, the same dark emptiness, cycling over and over. I checked my phone. No signal. The clock on my dashboard still read 11:43 p.m. It hadn't changed since I first seen the gas station. Time had stopped, or maybe I had stopped, somehow, frozen in this moment while the rest of the world moved on without me. I tried everything. I sped up, pushing 90 miles an hour. I slowed down to a crawl. I pulled over and waited, watching the darkness, hoping something would change. Nothing did. Every time I reached what should have been mile marker 252, I found myself back at 247. The desert on either side remained featureless and empty. No buildings, no turnoffs, no variation. Just scrub brush and darkness stretching to an invisible horizon. Hours passed, though my clock insisted otherwise. Or maybe no time passed at all. That is what made it so horrifying. I had no reference point anymore. My mind started fracturing, unable to process the impossibility of what was happening. That is when I started seeing the others. At first, they were just shapes in the darkness beyond my headlights. Human-shaped shadows standing among the brush, watching as I passed. I told myself they were cacti, rock formations, tricks of light and shadow. But cacti don't follow you with their heads. More appeared with each loop, standing closer to the road. Some were clear enough that I could make out details. They wore clothes from different eras. 50s diner uniforms, 70s bell-bottoms, 80s power suits, modern jeans and t-shirts. They were all travelers, all people who stopped on this stretch of highway and never left. The most disturbing part was their faces, or the lack thereof. Where features should have been, there was just smoothness, like mannequins. But I could feel them watching me anyway, feel their attention pressing against my car windows. I screamed. I cried. I pounded the steering wheel until my hands ached. Nothing changed. The loop continued. 247 to 251, then back to 247. Over and over and over. I started to understand what Earl had meant. You shouldn't stop here. Not at the gas station. Not on this stretch of road. Not ever, because once you did, once you broke the forward momentum, you fell out of time. You became stuck in the space between moments, trapped in a pocket of highway that existed but also didn't exist. The figures grew bolder. They came closer to the road, some standing right at the edge of the asphalt. One loop, I saw a woman in a sundress stepping onto the highway. I swerved, nearly losing control. When I looked back, she was gone. But in my passenger seat, there was a smell, perfume from another decade. Jasmine and cigarette smoke. My mind was going. I could feel it, the human brain ISN, designed for this kind of impossibility. We need cause and effect, linear time, predictable physics. Without those anchors, consciousness starts to drift. I thought about crashing, just jerking the wheel hard and ending it. But what if that didn't work? What if I survived, broken and trapped, unable to move while the figures closed in? What if death itself didn't work in this place, and I'd just be conscious forever, crushed in twisted metal, cycling through the same 40 miles? Then, between one loop and the next, something changed. There was a hitchhiker on the side of the road, real, solid, normal looking. A man in his 50s with a backpack, thumb out. Without thinking, purely from desperate loneliness, I started to slow down. That is when I saw his face. He looked tired, defeated, hopeless. And I recognized him. It was me, older, more weathered, but unmistakably me. He locked eyes with my younger self. and I saw in his expression a warning, a pleading. Don, T-stop. Whatever you do, Don, T-stop. I understood then. That was my future if I gave in. If I stopped fighting, stopped driving, stopped maintaining forward momentum. I'd become one of them, one of the figures in the darkness, waiting for the next person to fall into the trap. Terror turned to determination. I pressed harder on the gas. Mile marker 247, then 248. I started counting out loud, focusing every shred of consciousness on the numbers, on moving forward, on refusing to accept the loop as permanent. 247, 248, 249. The figures pressed in on both sides now, dozens of them, hundreds maybe. All the lost travelers, all the people who you stopped believing they could escape. 250, 251. My voice was hoarse, screaming the numbers. The clock on my dashboard flickered. 11:43 became 11:44. Just for a second, then back to 11:43. But that second was everything. Time had moved, just a fraction, just enough to show that the prison had cracks. 247, 248, 249, 250, 251. I drove faster. The engine screamed in protest. The figures were reaching for my car now, pressing against the windows, their smooth faces somehow conveying desperation. They didn't want to hurt me. They wanted me to join them. They wanted me to stop, to give up, to accept the loop. 247. My voice was raw. 248. 249. 250. 251. 252. The darkness exploded into light. Suddenly there were headlights behind me, beside me. Other cars, other travelers, all driving the same direction. The desert opened up, became real again, with houses and billboards and all the normal ugly commercial sprawl of modern America. My dashboard clock jumped forward. 6:17 a.m. I'd lost 7 hours. I pulled into the first rest stop I found and sat there shaking until the sun was fully up. Other drivers came and went, living their normal lives, completely unaware of what existed just a few miles back on that empty stretch of highway. I called in sick to work, drove home in daylight, taking a different route, one that bypassed Highway 89 entirely. I told myself it was over, that I escaped, that I did never think about it again. But here, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night. 2 weeks later, I saw a news story. A car had been found abandoned on Highway 89, near mile marker 247. The driver was missing. His phone was still in the car, his wallet, his keys. The engine was still running. He simply vanished. They interviewed his wife. She said he called her around midnight, said he was stopping for gas at a station she'd never heard of. That was the last anyone heard from him. I know where he is. I know he was walking that 40-mile loop, watching his odometer betray him over and over, watching the figures close in. I know he'll eventually see himself hitchhiking on the side of the road, and he'll understand what is waiting if he stops fighting. I still drive that route sometimes. I have to, for work, but I never stop. Not for gas, not for food, not if my bladder is screaming. I keep my speed steady, my eyes on the road, and I count every mile marker until I pass that section. Because now I know the truth. There are places that exist outside of time, pockets of reality that trap the unwary. And they hungry. They want more travelers, more people to populate their endless shadows. Sometimes, late at night when I am driving, I catch glimpses in my peripheral vision. Figures standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. And I wonder if I really escaped that loop, or if I'm still there, still cycling through those 40 miles, and everything since has been a dream my breaking mind created to protect itself. I check my odometer every time I pass that exit. The numbers always move forward like they should. But sometimes, just sometimes, I could swear I see mile marker 247 twice. Story 2. Last stop on Route 29. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw everyone smiling at the gas station. Not the polite kind of smile you give a stranger, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that stays frozen on a face for far too long. It was 3 a.m. on Route 29, somewhere between nowhere and nothing in rural Nevada. My phone had died an hour back, and the fuel gauge had been flirting with empty for the last 20 miles. When those flickering lights appeared in the distance, I nearly wept with relief. A 24-hour station called Lucky, yes. The neon sign buzzed and crackled in the desert silence, casting everything in an unsettling red glow that made the whole place look like it was bleeding into the darkness. I pulled up to pump 7. The air outside hit me like a wall, that dry Nevada heat that sucks the moisture from your lungs. But something else hung in that air too. Something chemical and sweet, like overripe fruit left to rot in the sun. The kind of smell that makes your stomach turn without you understanding why. That's when I noticed them. 3 people standing perfectly still at different pumps. A woman in a blue sundress at pump 3. A man in a trucker cap at pump 5. A teenager in a basketball jersey at pump 9. All of them holding the nozzles to their vehicles. All of them staring directly at me with those same frozen smiles. None of them were pumping gas. The hair on my neck stood up. Something deep in my brain, some ancient survival instinct, started screaming. But I needed fuel. My tank was bone dry, and the next town was 50 miles according to the last road sign I'd seen. I had no choice. I stepped out of my car. The night was absolutely silent except for that buzzing neon sign. No crickets, no wind, no distant traffic, just that horrible electrical hum and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The woman in the sundress turned her head to follow me as I walked toward the payment terminal. Her body remained perfectly still. Only her head moved, tracking me with mechanical precision. The smile never wavered. Her eyes never blinked. I tried to use my credit card at the pump. The screen flickered to life, displaying a message in bright green letters. Please pay inside. Of course, the universe had a sick sense of humor tonight. The store windows were fogged up from the inside, moisture clinging to the glass in a way that didn't make sense in this dry heat. I could see shapes moving behind the condensation, shadows passing back and forth in repetitive patterns, like figures pacing the same route over and over. My hand touched the door handle. It was hot, scorching hot, as if the metal had been sitting in direct sunlight for hours. I yanked my hand back, looking at the red mark already forming on my palm. It was 3 a.m. There was no sun. The door swung open on its own before I could process this. No one stood on the other side. Just that same chemical smell, stronger now, mixed with something else. Copper, like old pennies left in a jar. Like blood. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light that created deep shadows in the corners. The aisles were fully stocked. Chips, candy bars, energy drinks, beef jerky, everything a late-night traveler might need. But everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, as if no one had actually touched any of it in months. A man stood behind the counter, mid-50s, wearing a name tag that said Dennis and a Lucky uniform polo shirt. He was smiling, that same smile, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Welcome to Lucky," he said. His voice sounded normal, too normal, like an actor reading lines they de-rehearsed 1,000 times. "How can I help you tonight?" "I need to prepay for pump 7, I said. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. Dennis nodded slowly. His smile grew wider. "Pump 7. That's a lucky number. You're very lucky tonight." Something was deeply wrong with the way he emphasized the word lucky. Like it meant something different to him. Something dark? I handed him 2 20s. He took them without looking away from my face. His fingers felt cold when they brushed against mine. Not just cool, actually cold, like touching meat fresh from a refrigerator. "You are first customer in quite a while," Dennis said, still smiling. We've been waiting for someone like you." "Someone like me?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Someone who stops," he said. His head tilted slightly, and I heard his neck crack. Not a normal crack, a wet, grinding sound that made my stomach lurch. Most people drive right past. They sense something. That animal instinct. But you stop. That makes you special. I wanted to leave. Every fiber of my being screamed to abandon the car, to run into that desert darkness and take my chances with the rattlesnakes and scorpions. But where would I go? 50 miles of nothing in every direction. "Can I use your restroom?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Maybe there was a back door. Maybe I could slip out while Dennis stood there with his horrifying smile. He pointed toward the back of the store without moving his eyes from my face. Through the stockroom. Last door on the left. I walked down the aisle, feeling his gaze burning into my back. The stockroom door was propped open with a cinder block. Inside, boxes were stacked to the ceiling, creating narrow pathways between them. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, swaying slightly despite the absence of any breeze. That is when I saw them. Photographs taped to the boxes. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All showing the same thing. People standing at the gas pumps outside. Men, women, children. Different clothes, different cars, different time periods judging by the vehicles and fashion. But all of them had that same frozen smile. All of them holding the nozzles. None of them pumping gas. My hands shook as I pulled one photo down for a closer look. The date stamp in the corner read 1987. The man in the picture wore clothes from that era. But behind him, clearly visible in the background, was my car. My exact car, sitting at pump 7. That wasn't possible. That couldn't be possible. I tore down another photo, 1972. A woman in bell-bottoms and a tie-dye shirt. And there, behind her at pump 7, my car again. Same license plate, same dent in the rear bumper from where I backed into a parking meter 2 years ago. The temperature in the stockroom plummeted. My breath came out in visible clouds. The light bulb overhead began to flicker, casting wild shadows across the walls of boxes and photographs. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. I spun around to find Dennis standing in the doorway. But he wasn't alone. The woman in the sundress stood beside him. The trucker, the teenager, all of them crowding the narrow entrance, blocking my escape. All of them smiling. You've seen the gallery, Dennis said. His voice sounded different now. Layered, as if multiple people were speaking through his mouth at once. Everyone who stops becomes part of Lucky. Everyone who ignores that little voice telling them to keep driving. We all made the same mistake you made. What are you? The question came out as barely a whisper. The lucky ones, the woman in the sundress said. Her lips didn't quite match the words. We get to stay, we get to wait, we get to smile. They moved toward me in perfect synchronization. Their movements too smooth, too coordinated. I stumbled backward, knocking into boxes. Photographs rained down around me, faces of the damned fluttering through the freezing air. That is when I saw it, in the far corner of the stockroom, barely visible in the flickering light. A door marked emergency exit. The red letters glowed faintly in the darkness. I ran. God help me. I ran like I'd never run before. I crashed through boxes, sending decades of photographs flying. Their hands reached for me, cold fingers brushing my shirt, my hair, my skin. But I was faster. Terror gave me speed. I hit the emergency exit at full sprint. The door flew open, and alarm bells should have started ringing. But there was only silence. I tumbled out into the night, hitting the gravel hard enough to tear the skin on my palms and knees. I was behind the gas station. In the glow from the building, I could see what looked like a small cemetery. No headstones, just mounds of dirt arranged in neat rows. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds stretching back into the darkness. And standing at each mound, barely visible in the shadows, were figures. People, all facing the gas station. All perfectly still, all smiling. I heard that door creak open behind me. Dennis and the others were coming. But something else caught my attention. Movement at one of the mounds closest to me. The dirt was shifting, bulging upward. Something was trying to dig its way out from underneath. A hand burst through the soil, pale, dirt-covered fingers clawing at the air. Then another hand. The figure pulled itself up from the ground with jerky, unnatural movements. It stood, brushing dirt from clothes that looked like they were from the 1960s. It turned toward me. It smiled. I didn't wait to see more. I ran around the building, back toward the parking lot in my car. The keys were still in the ignition where I left them. Pump 7 showed that I prepaid for $40 of gas. The nozzle hung waiting in its cradle, but I couldn't pump the gas. Something stopped me, because as I reached for that nozzle, I caught my reflection in my car window. And I was smiling, that same frozen smile. I couldn't feel it on my face, couldn't feel my facial muscles pulled into that expression. But there it was, reflected back at me in the glass. I tried to stop smiling, tried to move my face into any other expression. Nothing happened. The smile remained. Frozen and terrible. My hands moved on their own. They reached for the nozzle. They lifted it toward my fuel tank. And I couldn't stop them. Couldn't control my own body. I was a passenger in my own skin, watching helplessly as my hands began the process that would make me like the others. Then I heard it, a car engine. Headlights swept across the parking lot as an old pickup truck pulled off Route 29 and into Lucky's. A young couple sat in the front seat, laughing about something. They hadn't noticed me yet, hadn't noticed anything wrong. The moment their truck stopped, I felt control return to my body. The smile faded. My hands were my own again. I looked toward the store and saw Dennis and the others had returned to their positions. Dennis behind the counter, the woman at pump 3. the trucker at pump 5, the teenager at pump 9, all frozen, all smiling, all waiting for the next victim. I understood then, the station needed someone new. It was offering me a choice. Stay frozen at pump 7, or move on. Let someone else take my place. Let that young couple walk into the nightmare that had almost consumed me. I could have warned them, should have warned them, screamed for them to drive away, to trust their instincts, to never stop at Lucky, because no matter how empty their tank ran. But I didn't. God forgive me, I didn't. Because when I looked at my hands, I could see something wrong with them. The skin looked waxy, artificial. And when I touched my face, it felt numb, like I was touching someone else's skin, like whatever had begun to change me wasn't quite finished. I got in my car, started the engine, and I drove. I drove past that young couple walking toward the store entrance, past Dennis waving from behind his fogged-up windows, past the woman and the trucker and the teenager, all of them turning their heads in perfect unison to watch me leave. I drove until Lucky. This was nothing but a red glow in my rearview mirror. Then I drove some more, 50 miles to the next town. I coasted in on fumes and filled up at a bright, normal, crowded gas station where real people pumped real gas and nobody smiled at me for longer than a polite second. But here, it's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The thing that makes me question what is real and what I said. That was 6 months ago. And I still can shake the feeling that something didn't that night. That I didn't fully escape. Because sometimes when I'm alone at night, I catch myself in a mirror. And for just a fraction of a second, before I have time to consciously control it, I see that smile. That frozen, terrible smile spreading across my face. And my reflection, his eyes look hollow, empty, like I'm looking at a photograph of myself rather than an actual living person. And worst of all, they started driving Route 29 again. I tell myself it's because it's the fastest route between work and home. But that's a lie. Some part of me is drawn back to that stretch of Nevada desert. Some part of me wants to see if Lucky is still there. Wants to know if that young couple made it out. Wants to understand what is happening to me, because my hands still feel wrong sometimes, and my face goes numb. And I catch myself standing in places without remembering how I got there, holding things without remembering picking them up, smiling at strangers for far too long. I think Lucky let me go that night. But I am starting to suspect that doesn't mean I am free. I think maybe the station is still there inside me, waiting, growing, spreading, turning me into something that can start the process all over again somewhere new. Last week, I found myself standing in my garage at 3 a.m, completely unaware of how I had gotten there. I was holding a can of red paint and a brush, and on the wall, written in large, dripping letters, "Welcome to Lucky, is." I don't remember writing it. Don't remember buying the paint, but my hands were covered in it, and I was smiling, always smiling. I painted over it the next morning, but every night since, I've woken up standing in that garage, staring at the wall. The paint is starting to seep through. Those words bleeding back into visibility no matter how many coats I apply. I don't know what I'm becoming. Don't know if I'm still entirely human or if I'm transforming into something else. Something that belongs to that stretch of highway. Something that feeds on the fear and confusion of travelers who make the mistake of stopping when they should keep driving. All I know is that every night, I feel a little less like myself, a little more like them. And sooner or later, I'm going to finish whatever transformation started that night at Pump 7. When that happens, when I'm finally more lucky than me, I wonder where I'll end up. Will I return to that gas station in the desert? Will I take my place among the others, frozen and smiling, waiting for the next person who ignores their instincts? Or will I become something worse, something that can move, something that can spread, something that can turn other places into Lucky, other gas stations, other rest stops, other quiet businesses along empty highways where people stop because they have no choice? I see the signs already. The way people have started looking at me strangely. The way conversations die when I enter a room. The way my coworkers have stopped meeting my eyes. They sense something. That same animal instinct that should have kept me driving past Lucky that night. They don't know what I am. Not yet. But they will. Soon enough, they understand. Soon enough, everyone will know about Lucky about what waits on Route 29, about what happens when you ignore that voice in your head telling you something is deeply, horribly wrong. Because I am still here, still changing, still smiling, and every day, I feel a little less like the person who drove up to Pump 7 6 months ago. Every day, I feel a little more like I belong to something vast and ancient and hungry. Something that's been waiting alongside that desert highway for longer than any of us can imagine. Something that is finally ready to expand beyond that single gas station. To spread, to grow, to welcome more travelers into its embrace. The only question now is, who will be next? Who will see those flickering lights in the distance and think they resave? Who will ignore the chemical smell and the frozen smiles and the photographs of the damned? Who will stand at a pump, holding a nozzle, becoming part of something they can to possibly understand? Maybe it will be you. Maybe the next time you driving late at night on an empty highway, running low on fuel, desperate for salvation. You'll see those red lights bleeding into the darkness. You'll see the sign that says lucky. Yes. And despite everything inside you screaming to keep driving, you'll stop. You will always stop. That is what the highway wants. That is what lucky S requires. And that is what they become. Another way to make you stop. Another smile in the darkness. Another warning you'll ignore. See you soon. I'll be the one at Pump 7. Smiling. Waiting. Welcome to Lucky. We're going to be so very lucky tonight. The strangest moments rarely feel dangerous at first. Story 3. Wrong highway. Have you ever driven somewhere and realized you have no memory of the last 40 minutes? You're still sitting in your car, still on the highway, but something feels fundamentally wrong about the place you're in. This is what happened to me, and I need to tell you before I forget the details. Before whatever is happening finishes what it started. My name is David. I am a 52-year-old truck driver from Ohio. For 30 years, I've driven Interstate 75 between Cincinnati and Knoxville at least twice a week. I know every rest stop, every dangerous curve, every town along that road. Or at least I thought I did. 3 nights ago, I made a run I'd made 1,000 times before. Left Cincinnati at sunset with a load of automotive parts heading south. The highway was empty, which wasn't unusual for a Wednesday evening in late November. The weather was clear. The radio was playing classic country. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should have been. Then, somewhere around mile marker 412, everything changed. I remember the feeling first. A creeping sensation started at the back of my neck. Not pain, not quite fear, but something unsettling that made my hands grip the steering wheel tighter. The air inside my cab felt colder, even though the heater was running. My breath started fogging the windshield in patterns that seemed deliberate, intentional, like someone was breathing on the glass from the outside. I told myself it was nothing. Road fatigue. The mind playing tricks at midnight. I'd been driving for 8 hours. But then I looked at the odometer, and my stomach dropped. According to my GPS, I should have passed Knoxville 40 minutes ago. According to the time on my dashboard, I should have been off this highway, parked at a truck stop, eating terrible coffee and a chicken sandwich. But I was still driving. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, illuminated by my headlights, and behind me, it simply disappeared into absolute darkness. The creepy feeling intensified. I couldn't shake the disturbing sensation that I was being watched. The shadows on both sides of the highway seemed deeper than normal, denser somehow, as if they weren't just an absence of light but a presence of something else entirely. Something dark and aware. I took the next exit. This is where it gets terrifying. The exit ramp descended into a fog so thick I could barely see 30 feet ahead. I slowed my 18-wheeler down to a crawl, my heart pounding against my ribs. The fog was wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't the kind of fog that came from cold ground meeting warm air. It was dry somehow, static, and it moved with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. The road beneath my tires was asphalt, but it felt uneven, cracked, as if nobody had maintained it in years. Yet when my headlights cut through the fog and I could see the surface, it looked pristine, perfect, almost too perfect. This contradiction should have been impossible, but my tires registered every irregularity. The exit ramp led to a town, or what was left of one. This is the part that still haunts me. This is where the unsettling truly became horrifying. The town looked familiar. I knew this town. I was certain I'd driven through it 100 times. The street layout matched my memory. The buildings were in the right places. There was the old gas station on the corner, the diner with the blue awning, the church with the white steeple. All of it was exactly where it should have been, but everything was slightly wrong. The gas station, its pumps were from the 1980s. Not vintage, not retro, genuinely old, as if they'd been sitting there untouched for 4 decades. The paint was faded to a color that shouldn't exist anymore, a greenish yellow that made my eyes hurt to look at. The diner's blue awning was partially torn, but the tear looked fresh. Too fresh, like someone had ripped it that morning. The streetlights were the old mercury vapor kind, casting an eerie green glow over everything, and they all seemed to flicker in unison, as if controlled by a single pulse. The shadows between the buildings were impossibly dark, not just dark, but chilling in a way that seemed to defy the streetlights' illumination. I pulled my truck to the side of the road and sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my hands shaking so violently I could barely keep them on the wheel. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. There were no people, not a single soul anywhere on the street. No cars parked in driveways. No lights in the windows of the houses. No evidence that anyone had lived here in a very long time. Yet the town wasn't abandoned. That's what made it so terrifying. An abandoned town feels dead. This place felt like it was waiting. The scratching sound started around 2 in the morning. It came from the exterior of my cab, something dragging along the metal as if trying to find a way in. The sound was slow, deliberate, patient, not aggressive like an animal scratching, more like fingernails, long and sharp, methodically working across the surface of my truck. I locked the doors, which was ridiculous because I was already locked in. The paralyzing fear made me irrational. I started the engine, the cab roared to life, and the scratching immediately stopped. I drove deeper into that horrifying place, not because I wanted to, but because I was more terrified of what was outside my cab than whatever might be ahead of me. The road seemed to loop, always bringing me back to the same intersection. The diner with the torn awning, the gas station with the impossible pumps, the white church with windows like empty eyes. My GPS was useless. The screen showed me somewhere in the middle of Kentucky, but the landmarks on the screen looked nothing like what surrounded me. The road behind me on the map kept disappearing, replaced by white space, as if the roads I'd already driven on had ceased to exist. I drove for hours in that loop, or days. Time felt fractured, unreliable. My fuel gauge showed full, but I swear I watched the needle never move. The sun never rose. The sky remained that deep, impossible blue-black of the deepest night. Yet somehow I could still see. There was illumination, but I couldn't determine its source. The nightmare deepened when I finally broke out of the loop. I was heading north on what appeared to be a different road. The landscape had changed. Trees towered on both sides, ancient and twisted, their bark black and their branches skeletal. The road itself had deteriorated. Massive cracks split the asphalt. Chunks were missing entirely, yet my truck drove smoothly, as if the road was perfectly maintained. This disconnect made me wonder if I was hallucinating, if the terror had finally broken something essential in my mind. Then I saw the road sign. It was conventional, white and green, the standard design you see throughout America. But the text made no sense. It read, Exit 412. Departure. Time unknown. Return. Never. I blinked, certain my eyes were deceiving me. When I looked again, the sign was gone. The pole it had been attached to was still there, but empty. The cold was becoming unbearable. Despite the heater running full blast, my breath came out in visible clouds. Frost was forming on the inside of my windshield, and when I scraped it away, I saw something carved into the glass. Words, scratched from the inside. They read, "Help us stay." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep control of the truck. I floored the accelerator, desperate to escape that nightmare landscape. The road twisted violently, and suddenly I crashed through a barrier, tearing apart fence posts and crashing through what felt like decades of accumulated decay. For one disorienting moment, there was nothing. No road, no trees, no light, just absolute, suffocating darkness and the terrible sensation of falling. Then my headlights hit asphalt again. I was back on the Interstate 75, heading north. The fog was gone. The night was clear. The stars were visible above, and they were the right stars, the constellations I recognized from my childhood in Ohio. My GPS was working again. showing me exactly where I should be. Cincinnati, 90 miles north. The timestamp showed 6:45 in the morning. The nightmare was over, except it wasn't. Not really. I pulled into a rest stop near the Kentucky-Ohio border. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like the real world again. I went into the rest stop bathroom and splashed water on my face, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that I experienced a stress-induced hallucination brought on by years of exhaustion. But then I checked my odometer. I'd driven approximately 470 miles in the 8 hours I'd been on the road. That was impossible. Cincinnati to Knoxville was only about 500 miles total. I shouldn't have been anywhere near that distance unless I'd driven past my intended destination and kept going. My fuel consumption told the same disturbing story. I burned nearly a full tank, 40 gallons, in a truck that normally gets 6 miles per gallon. That meant I'd actually driven somewhere, covered real distance, even though I remembered circling endlessly through that impossible town. The fear returned, multiplied. I'd gone somewhere. That wasn't a hallucination. I'd actually been in that chilling place. The question that has haunted me for 3 days now is where. I tried to find the town on maps, asking other drivers if they recognize my description. Nobody does. Nobody has ever heard of a town with a blue awning diner and a gas station with 1980s pumps on that stretch of highway. The roads I drove on, according to Google Maps and every navigation system they checked, done to exist. But I was there. When I finally reached my dispatch office and turned in my paperwork, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My logbook showed I'd only been driving for 4 hours, not 8. According to the records, I should have delivered my load 6 hours ago. 4 hours of my life are missing. That's not the worst part, though. The worst part is what I realized when I was unloading my truck at the distribution center. The load of automotive parts one was transporting had been damaged. Not by impact, not by shifting or rough handling, but by scratches. Deep, deliberate scratches across every single box, as if something with claws had methodically gone through every crate in the cargo hold. The scratches formed patterns, almost like writing. I am looking at photographs of them right now, and I am starting to make out what might be letters. Words, perhaps, a message from whatever world I was pulled into. But I'm terrified to decipher it completely, because part of me knows that understanding the message means accepting that what happened was real, that I really did disappear into a place that shouldn't exist. The most frightening aspect is this. For the past 3 nights, I've been experiencing something deeply disturbing. I find myself on Interstate 75, even when I dawn to remember getting in my truck. My coworkers have seen me sitting in the parking lot, engine running, staring at nothing, for hours at a time. I have no memory of these episodes. Last night, I woke up with frost patterns on my windshield and those same words carved into the glass from the inside. Help us stay. I done. Do you know who us refers to? I done. Do you know what is happening to me? But I know this. Every time I close my eyes, I see that impossible town. Every time I drive at night, I feel that cold, eerie sensation creeping up my spine. And I know, with absolute certainty, that something from that chilling place is still with me. Something is trying to pull me back. The terrifying truth is that I don't think I ever actually left. I think some version of me is still driving through that nightmare, still circling that haunted town, still waiting. And the version of me sitting here, typing this account, is just an echo, a shadow, something that was left behind. The creepy knowledge that haunts me most is this. I'm scheduled to drive Interstate 75 tomorrow night. I don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know if I've ever actually made it anywhere. Story 4. I didn't realize time was missing. I lost 4 hours on Interstate 40, and I still don't. Do you know where they went? It happened 3 weeks ago, driving back from Albuquerque to Oklahoma City. A straight shot I made dozens of times. Nothing unusual about that night. Clear sky, empty road, tank full of gas. I left the city limits at 11 p.m. sharp. I remember checking my phone before tossing it on the passenger seat. The clock glowed green in the darkness. 11:03. The next thing I knew, I was pulling into a rest stop near the Texas border, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m. 4 hours and 14 minutes had vanished. No memory of the drive. No sense of missing time. Just this horrifying gap where my life should have been. But here is what made it truly terrifying. My gas tank was still full. I'd driven over 200 miles on the same tank I started with. And there were things in my car that hadn't been there before. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Something sharp and chemical, like formaldehyde mixed with burnt rubber. It made my eyes water. I stumbled out of the driver's seat, gasping for air in the empty parking lot. The rest stop was abandoned. Not a single car besides mine. The bathroom lights flickered in the distance, casting eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. Above me, the stars looked wrong somehow. Too bright, too close. I checked my phone. Dead. Completely drained despite being at 70% when I left Albuquerque. When I plugged it into the charger, it wouldn't turn on. Just this faint clicking sound coming from inside, like something had broken loose. That is when I saw the photographs. They were scattered across the back seat. Polaroids. Dozens of them, all showing the same stretch of highway, taken from my car's perspective. But in each photo, there was something standing on the shoulder of the road. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, facing away from the camera. In every single picture, it was closer, moving toward the car between shots. My stomach dropped. I didn't own a Polaroid camera. I'd never seen these images before. Yet here they were, arranged in sequence, documenting something I couldn't remember experiencing. The last photograph in the series showed the figure standing directly beside my driver's side window. Its face pressed against the glass, except it didn't have a face, just smooth, pale skin where features should have been, and in the reflection of the window, I could see myself behind the wheel. Eyes open, hands on the steering wheel, but my expression was completely blank, empty, like nobody was home inside my skull. I threw the photos across the parking lot and ran back to my car. Every instinct screamed at me to drive, to get far away from that rest stop and whatever had happened during those missing hours. But when I looked down at my hands, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. My fingernails were black, not painted, not dirty, black from underneath, like something dark was spreading through my nail beds. And when I touched them, they felt cold, colder than the night air, colder than anything living should feel. I drove for 3 hours straight without stopping, desperate to reach Oklahoma City before dawn. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, empty and dark. No other cars, no lights except my headlights cutting through the shadows. The radio wouldn't work. Every station was just static, occasionally broken by what sounded like breathing. Deep, slow breathing that didn't match any rhythm I recognized. Around 5 a.m., I passed a billboard I'd never seen before. Hand-painted letters on weathered wood. It read, "You were not remembering because you weren't there." Below it, someone had spray-painted a phone number in red. I should have kept driving, should have ignored it, but something made me pull over and write down that number on the back of the gas receipt. My hands were shaking so badly the digits were barely legible. Even now, I can explain why I did it. It felt like compulsion, like something outside my control was guiding my actions. When I finally reached my apartment, the sun was rising, golden light spilling across the parking lot, making everything look normal and safe. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just breathing, trying to convince myself I imagined everything. A bad dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much coffee. But the smell was still there, chemical and wrong. And when I checked the back seat again, I found something else. A small plastic bag containing what looked like hair. Long, dark strands tied together with a thin piece of wire. Not my hair. Mine was short and graying. This hair was black as midnight, thick and coarse. Attached to the bag was a note written in handwriting I didn't recognize. It said, "Sample collected. Subject viable. Proceed to phase 2. I burned it all. The bag, the note, the remaining photographs I gathered from the rest stop parking lot. Watched them curl and blacken in my kitchen sink, the smoke detector screaming overhead. But burning them didn't make me feel better. Because deep down, I knew they were just copies. Evidence of something larger. Something I'd been part of without knowing. The blackness under my fingernails spread over the next 3 days. Slow but steady, creeping up toward my cuticles. I went to a doctor. She ran tests, blood work, x-rays. Everything came back normal. She suggested it might be a fungal infection and prescribed cream that did absolutely nothing. When I insisted something was seriously wrong, she looked at me with that particular expression doctors reserve for crazy people and suggested I see a therapist. I didn't tell her about the missing time. Didn't mention the photographs or the note. Something warned me to keep quiet. An instinct I couldn't explain but didn't dare ignore. On the fourth night after my drive, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. The exact time I arrived at that rest stop. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a knife, staring at my reflection in the window above the sink. I had no memory of getting out of bed, no idea how long I'd been standing there, but my feet were cold and dirty, covered in dust that looked like desert sand. The horrifying truth began settling over me like a shroud. The missing time wasn't just missing. It was being used. By what or who? I didn't know. But I was losing control of my own life in ways I couldn't understand or prevent. I called the number from the billboard. It rang 17 times before someone picked up. No greeting, no voice, just that same slow breathing I heard on the radio. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, but no sound came out. My throat had locked up completely. And then I heard my own voice coming through the phone. My voice, speaking words I wasn't saying. Confirmation received. Integration proceeding as expected. Do not resist the process. The line went dead. I dropped the phone and backed against the wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might tear through my chest. The darkness under my nails had reached my knuckles now, spreading like ink through water. When I looked at my reflection in the microwave door, I saw something moving behind my eyes. Something that wasn't me looking out through my own face. I tried to leave, packed a bag and headed for the door, ready to drive anywhere else. Anywhere far from Oklahoma, from that highway, from whatever was happening to me. But my body wouldn't cooperate. My legs stopped working halfway to the car. I collapsed in the parking lot, fully conscious but completely paralyzed, staring up at the morning sky while my neighbors walked past without noticing me lying there. 3 hours disappeared. When I could move again, I was back inside my apartment, sitting at my kitchen table. There was a new photograph in front of me. Another Polaroid. This one showed me standing in an empty field at night, surrounded by dozens of other people. All of us facing the same direction. All of us with the same blank expressions. And in the distance, barely visible in the darkness, something massive and dark blotted out the stars. I don't drive at night anymore. To leave my apartment after sunset. But it doesn't matter. The missing time keeps happening. Hours vanishing without warning. I'll be reading or watching television, and suddenly it is 4 hours later and I'm somewhere else. Sometimes I'm still in my apartment. Sometimes I wake up in my car, parked in places I don't recognize. Last week, I found myself standing in my bathroom at 3:17 a.m., holding a razor blade, carving something into my forearm. A symbol I'd never seen before. Geometric and precise. By the time I regained control, it was finished. The cuts were clean and deliberate, already starting to scab over. The design looked like some kind of coordinates or mathematical equation. The blackness has spread to my wrists now, under the skin, crawling up my arms like roots. I can feel it moving inside me, cold and patient and utterly foreign. Whatever is taking my time, ISM, just stealing hours. It is replacing me. I called the number again tonight. The breathing answered immediately, like it had been waiting. And this time, when my stolen voice spoke through the phone, it said something different. Integration complete. Thank you for your cooperation. I'll be taking over permanently at the next interval. The next interval is scheduled for 3:17 a.m., 2 hours from now. I am writing this as a warning, as evidence, as proof that I existed before whatever comes next. Because I know when that time comes, I want to remember writing these words. Want to remember being afraid. Want to remember being me. The worst part, I said, to the fear or the confusion. It's the knowing that somewhere in those missing hours, I've been doing things, participating in something vast and terrible. And whatever it is, it's not finished with me yet. It's not finished with any of us. If you ever lost time and couldn't explain it, check your hands. Check under your nails. See if the darkness is spreading there too. Because I don't think I'm alone in this. I think there are others, maybe thousands of us, scattered across the country, losing hours we'll never get back, being used for purposes we can to comprehend. The clock just changed to 3:16 a.m. I can feel it starting. That familiar sensation of slipping away, of being pushed aside inside my own skull. Soon I'll be gone again, and something else will be looking through my eyes, walking around in my skin. doing things I'll never remember. Hours disappear without warning. No confusion, no panic, just gaps that make no sense afterward. The realization came too late. When reality bends slightly, the mind doesn't always notice. Story 5. Silence at Cedar Pine Motel. Have you ever experienced a moment when every single sound just stops? Not gradually, not naturally, but all at once, like someone hit a mute button on reality itself? That is what happened to me at the Cedar Pine Motel. And what came after that silence changed everything I thought I understood about the world. I'm a sales representative for industrial equipment, 47 years old, and I've stayed in more roadside motels than I can count. The Cedar Pine was just another pin on the map, a cheap place to crash off Interstate 40 in rural Tennessee. One story, 12 rooms, a flickering neon sign that buzzed like angry wasps. The kind of place where you keep your shoes on and don't look too closely at the stains. It was a Thursday night in September when I pulled in around 10 p.m. The parking lot held only 2 other vehicles, a rusted pickup truck and a sedan with Oklahoma plates. The office smelled like cigarettes and artificial pine, that sickly sweet scent that never quite masks the underlying rot. The clerk was a woman in her 60s with hard eyes and yellow fingernails. She barely looked at me as she slid the key across the counter. Room 7, cash only. The room was exactly what I expected. Thin carpet, brown water stains on the ceiling, a TV from the 90s bolted to the dresser. But it was clean enough, and the bed looked decent. I survived worse. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and settled in for the night. A quick shower, some mindless television, then sleep. Simple, normal, safe. The unsettling feeling started around 11:30. I was half watching some old western when I noticed the sounds from neighboring rooms had stopped. Before, I heard the usual motel symphony. Muffled conversations, footsteps, water running through pipes, the hum of air conditioning units. The typical background noise that tells you other people are nearby, living their lives in their own little boxes. But now, nothing. Complete silence except for the television. I turned down the volume, listening. The eerie quiet pressed against my eardrums like pressure before a storm. No traffic sounds from the interstate. No insects chirping. No wind. Just a heavy, oppressive nothingness that made my skin crawl. Then everything went quiet at once. The television died mid-sentence. The air conditioning unit clicked off. Even the hum of electricity that you never notice until it is gone, that faint vibration that lives in the walls of every building, vanished completely. The darkness that followed wasn't natural. It was thick, suffocating, like the room had been sealed off from the rest of existence. My heart hammered in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen wouldn't light up. Dead, completely drained despite being fully charged minutes before. The silence was so absolute it felt physical, like cotton stuffed in my ears, muffling even the sound of my own breathing. I sat frozen on the bed, every muscle tense, my mind screaming that something was terribly, horrifyingly wrong. This wasn't the simple power outage. Those still have sound. You hear other people reacting, car alarms, distant generators. This was different. This was the world holding its breath. Then I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from outside my door. Not regular walking. Each step landed with the same exact weight, the same exact rhythm, like a metronome. Click, pause, click, pause, click. They moved past my room, continued down the walkway, then stopped. Right outside room 12, the last room at the end, a door opened. I heard it clearly despite the impossible silence everywhere else. Then it closed, and the footsteps returned, passing my door again, heading back toward the office. Click, pause, click, pause, click. My hands shook as I felt my way to the window. The curtains were cheap and thin. I pulled them back just enough to peek through. The parking lot was empty. Both vehicles that had been there when I checked in were gone. The neon sign was dark. Beyond the motel, where the interstate should have been a river of headlights and taillights, there was only blackness. No lights anywhere, no stars, no moon, just an endless void that seemed to swallow everything. And standing in the middle of the parking lot was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like the same clothes as the motel clerk. But the proportions were wrong. The arms hung too low, the head tilted at an angle that would break a normal person's neck. It stood perfectly still, facing my window, though I couldn't make out any features in the darkness. The terrifying part was knowing with absolute certainty that it could see me. I jerked back from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. The fear was primal, instinctive, the kind that lives deep in our DNA from when humans were prey animals hiding from things in the dark. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. But run where? Into that void outside, toward whatever that thing was. The footsteps started again. This time they were coming back, and they stopped directly outside my door. I heard breathing on the other side, wet and ragged, like lungs that had forgotten how to work properly. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, testing whether I delocked it. I had. Thank God. I had. The turning stopped. The breathing continued. Then came a sound that nearly broke my mind. Scratching. Long, slow drags of something sharp against the door, from top to bottom, methodical and patient. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to break in. It was marking the door, claiming it. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was seconds. Time felt as broken as everything else. The scratching continued, never speeding up, never slowing down. Just that steady, horrifying rhythm that burrowed into my brain. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything changed. Sound rushed back like a wave. The air conditioning kicked on with a mechanical roar that made me jump. The television blared to life, picking up exactly where it had left off. Light flooded the room. My phone screen lit up, showing a dozen missed call notifications. The normal sounds of a motel at night, muffled voices and distant traffic, wrapped around me like a blanket. I stood there shaking, disoriented, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Had it been real? Some kind of nightmare? A medical episode? But when I looked at my phone, 2 hours had passed. 2 hours of that silence, that darkness, that thing outside my door. 2 hours that felt both like minutes and like days. I wanted to leave immediately, to get in my car and drive until the sun came up. But something stopped me. A creeping dread that whatever had happened wasn't over, that opening my door would be the worst mistake of my life. So I waited, sitting on the bed, staring at the door, listening to every sound. The motel seemed normal now. Too normal, like it was trying too hard to convince me everything was fine. Around 3 a.m., I heard a scream. It was distant, muffled, coming from somewhere outside. A woman's voice, full of pure terror, cut off abruptly. Then nothing. No sirens, no commotion, no one reacting. Just the ordinary sounds of the night continuing as if nothing had happened. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag, shoved my feet into my shoes, and approached the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the deadbolt. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening for any sign of danger. Silence. Normal silence this time, the kind that just means no one is nearby. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The walkway was empty. The parking lot had the same vehicles as before, the pickup and the sedan, right where they'd been when I checked in. The neon sign buzzed and flickered. The interstate hummed with late-night traffic. Everything looked completely ordinary, except for my door. In the light spilling from my room, I could see the scratches. Deep gouges in the wood, 3 parallel lines running from top to bottom, fresh and raw. Not the kind of marks a person could make with their fingernails. These looked like something with claws had dragged them slowly down the door. I walked quickly to my car, every shadow making my heart race. The air felt wrong, charged with the same oppressive energy as before the silence. I threw my bag in the back seat and climbed in, locking the doors immediately. That is when I saw the woman in room 12. She was standing in her doorway, staring directly at me. The same clerk from the office, wearing the same clothes, with the same yellow fingernails. But her expression was blank, empty. Her head tilted at that same impossible angle I'd seen on the figure in the parking lot. She raised one hand and pointed at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just stood there, pointing, her eyes black and vacant. I started the engine and peeled out of that parking lot so fast my tires screamed. In my rearview mirror, I saw her still standing there, still pointing, growing smaller as I raced toward the interstate. Other figures emerged from the rooms, all of them the same, all of them watching me leave. I drove for 6 hours straight, not stopping until I was 3 states away and the sun was high in the sky. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, carbon monoxide poisoning, anything to make it make sense. But I couldn't. He explained the scratches on my door, captured in the photo I'd taken with my shaking hands. 3 days later, I saw a news report. The Cedar Pine Motel had been condemned and shut down. Health violations, they said. Structural issues. But reading between the lines, seeing the disturbed expressions on the sheriff's face in the interview, I knew they found something. Something they couldn't explain. Something they didn't want to talk about. The article mentioned that the motel had been the site of multiple disappearances over the years. Travelers who checked in and were never seen again. The official investigation found nothing conclusive, but local residents claimed the place had always been wrong, that strange things happened there after dark, that you could sometimes hear people screaming in rooms that were supposed to be empty. I started researching. Turns out the Cedar Pine wasn't too unique. There are places scattered across America, forgotten spots along forgotten roads, where the normal rules break down, where silence falls like a curtain and things that shouldn't exist walk freely. Most people never encounter them. They check in, sleep, check out, and never know how close they came. But some of us, for reasons I don't understand, get pulled into that other side. We experience the horrifying moment when reality cracks open and shows us what is underneath. And once they've seen it, once they've felt that unnatural silence and witnessed what moves through it, you can never quite trust the world again. I still travel for work. I still stay in roadside motels. But now I follow rules that would seem insane to anyone who hasn't experienced what I have. I never stay in end rooms. I always check the door for scratches before entering. And if everything goes quiet, if every sound stops at once and that heavy silence descends, I don't wait to see what happens next. I run because I know what is waiting in that silence. I know what marks doors in the darkness. And I know that some places exist in the spaces between, where things that hunger for the living wait patiently for the world to go quiet. The most disturbing part? I am starting to notice the patterns. The way certain motels feel wrong before anything happens. The way the air changes texture. The way light seems dimmer even when the bulbs are bright. I am developing an instinct for these places, and that terrifies me more than anything else. Because it means I am marked now. It means whatever exists in that silence knows me, recognizes me, and is waiting for the next time I let my guard down. Every motel is a potential trap. Every quiet night could be the beginning of another nightmare. Last week, I was staying in a Holiday Inn in Ohio. Clean, modern, corporate. Nothing like the Cedar Pine. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard it. That familiar click of footsteps outside my door. Click, pause, click, pause, click. My blood turned to ice. I held my breath, listening, praying I was imagining it. Then everything went quiet at once. The silence had found me again. Story 6. 40-mile loop. The night I drove in circles for 6 hours on a road that should have taken 20 minutes. I learned that darkness doesn't always follow the rules we think keep us safe. It started normally enough. I was heading home from a construction site outside Bakersfield, California, taking Highway 178 like I had 100 times before. A straight shot through the foothills, maybe 40 miles of empty 2-lane blacktop cutting through scrub brush and dried grass. I knew every curve, every mile marker, every pothole. I could drive it with my eyes closed. The sun had set about an hour earlier, leaving that deep purple twilight that comes right before true darkness takes over. My headlights carved tunnels through the growing shadows. The radio played classic rock, volume low, competing with the hum of my truck's engine. Everything felt routine, safe, familiar. That is when I passed the burned oak tree at mile marker 17. I'd seen that tree 1,000 times. Lightning had struck it years ago, leaving a blackened skeleton reaching toward the sky like twisted fingers. It marked the halfway point of my drive. From there, it was smooth sailing home, except 10 minutes later, I passed the burned oak tree again. I actually laughed at first, thought maybe I spaced out, missed a turn somewhere, doubled back without realizing it. But I hadn't turned. The road had been straight. I would have noticed. I checked my odometer. I'd driven 8 miles since first passing that tree. 8 miles forward on a straight road. There was no way I somehow circled back. The unsettling feeling started then. Not quite fear yet, just a creeping sense that something wasn't quite right. The kind of wrongness you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to explain why. I kept driving. The road stretched ahead exactly as it always did. Same curves, same slight inclines, same reflective markers along the shoulder catching my headlights. Nothing looked different. Nothing felt different except for that nagging sensation that had started to crawl up my spine. 15 minutes later, I passed the burned oak tree a third time. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My heart started beating faster. This wasn't possible. I hadn't turned around. Hadn't made any turns at all. The road had been completely straight for the last 20 miles according to my odometer. Yet there was that tree again, its charred branches unmistakable in my headlights. I pulled over, put the truck in park, got out into the night air. The temperature had dropped. Not unusual for desert foothills after sunset, but this felt different. Colder than it should have been. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you think about mortality and isolation and how far you are from anywhere that matters. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no distant traffic, no wind rustling through the dry grass. Just my breathing and the tick of my engine cooling and nothing else. The emptiness felt wrong, oppressive, like the world had been hollowed out and I was the only thing left inside it. I looked back the way I'd come. The road stretched into darkness, perfectly straight, exactly as it should be. I looked ahead, same thing, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the night with nothing to indicate anything unusual. But I passed the same landmark 3 times. That was a fact. That was real. I got back in my truck and tried my phone. No signal. Not surprising this far from town, but the timing felt ominous. I pulled up my GPS app anyway. The little blue dot showed me exactly where I should be, Highway 178, about halfway home. The route looked normal. Everything looked normal. I started driving again. This time, I paid obsessive attention to every detail. I counted telephone poles, watched my odometer, noted every small landmark I passed. A rusted guardrail at mile 18. A weathered billboard advertising a long-closed diner at mile 20. A concrete drainage culvert at mile 22. Then, at mile marker 17, the burned oak tree appeared in my headlights again. I'd just driven past all those landmarks in the correct order. I moved forward, steadily, continuously, yet somehow I ended up back where I started. The road had looped without looping. Distance had folded in on itself in a way that made no rational sense. The fear kicked in properly then. Real fear, the kind that makes your mouth go dry and your hands shake. Because this wasn't just strange. This was impossible. And when impossible things start happening, you realize how thin the layer of normalcy really is. How fragile your understanding of the world becomes when the basic rules stop applying. I tried going faster, pushed my truck up to 70, then 80. The engine roared. The road flew beneath me. My headlights swept across the empty landscape in wild arcs as I took the gentle curves at dangerous speeds. The burned oak tree kept appearing. Every 12 to 15 minutes, there it was again. Sometimes I didn't recognize it immediately. Sometimes I convinced myself this couldn't be the same tree, that there must be others like it along this stretch of highway. Then I see the specific pattern of the char, the exact angle of the branches, and I was trapped, caught in some kind of loop that shouldn't exist, driving the same section of road over and over despite moving constantly forward. The horror of it settled into my chest like ice water. I was going nowhere, making no progress, burning through my gas tank while the night stretched on and on. I tried turning around, drove backward for miles, my truck, its reverse lights casting everything in an eerie red glow. When I finally gave up and turned forward again, the burned oak tree was waiting for me. I tried pulling off the road, driving cross-country through the brush and dried grass. My truck bounced and lurched over the rough terrain, but every route I took eventually deposited me back on the highway. Back at mile marker 17. Back at that accusing skeleton of a tree. The night deepened. My gas gauge dropped toward a quarter tank. I should have been home hours ago. Someone should have noticed I was missing. But my phone had no signal and the road had no end, and I was completely, utterly alone in a darkness that refused to let me go. That's when I started noticing the other wrongness. The subtle things that had been there all along, but I'd been too focused on the loop to see. The stars were wrong. I'm not an astronomer, but I know the basic shapes. The Big Dipper, Orion, the North Star. But when I looked up through my windshield, the constellations were all unfamiliar. Strange patterns that didn't match anything I'd ever seen. The moon hung in the sky at an angle that felt off, casting shadows that moved the wrong way. And the darkness between my headlight beams was too complete, too absolute, like it wasn't just the absence of light but the presence of something else. Something that pressed against the edges of my vision, thick and suffocating. I'd been driving for almost 5 hours when I saw the other vehicle. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, distant at first but approaching fast. Relief flooded through me. Another person, someone else on this cursed stretch of road. Maybe they didn't know what was happening. Maybe together we could find a way out. The vehicle came closer. I slowed down, hoping it would pull alongside me. But it didn't. It just matched my speed, staying exactly the same distance behind me no matter how fast or slow I drove. I sped up. It sped up. I slowed to a crawl. It maintained that precise distance, its headlights boring into my mirrors with an intensity that made my eyes water. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The headlights were too bright, too white. They didn't move or bounce the way normal headlights should on this uneven road. They were perfectly steady, perfectly aimed, like they weren't attached to a vehicle at all, but were just floating there in the darkness behind me. I floored the accelerator. My truck jumped forward, engine screaming. The speedometer climbed to 90, 95, 100. The landscape blurred. My truck shook, and those headlights stayed exactly the same distance behind me. Unwavering, impossible. I hit the brakes hard. Rubber screamed. My truck fishtailed it, and the headlights behind me vanished instantly, as if they'd never been there at all. The silence that followed was devastating, more complete than before, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. That is when I passed the burned oak tree again and realized something new. The tree looked different, not drastically, but subtly. The char pattern had changed. Branches that had been broken before were now intact. The angle of the trunk had shifted. It wasn't the same tree. It was a different tree in the same location, or the same tree in a different state, or something else entirely that I didn't have the words or concepts to understand. The loop wasn't just spatial. It was changing, evolving. Each circuit wasn't quite identical to the last. The differences were small but accumulating. The road was slightly narrower this time. The paint on the center line seemed fresher. The telephone poles were spaced differently. I was sliding between versions of the same stretch of highway, each one similar but not quite identical, like looking at copies of a photograph, each one slightly degraded or altered from the original. The terror of this realization was beyond anything I had felt before. I wasn't just trapped in space. I was trapped in something deeper, something that involved the very fabric of reality unraveling around me. My gas gauge hit the red zone. I had maybe 30 minutes of fuel left. After that, I'd be stranded, sitting in a dead truck on a road that went nowhere, surrounded by a darkness that had teeth. That is when I noticed the figure standing beside the burned oak tree. It wasn't there, and then it was. No motion of approach, no sound of footsteps, just suddenly present, illuminated by my headlights as I came around the curve. A person, or something shaped like a person, tall and thin, standing perfectly straight. It didn't move as I approached, didn't turn its head or acknowledge my vehicle in any way. Just stood there beside the tree, impossibly still. Every instinct screamed at me to speed past, to not stop, to not engage with whatever that thing was. But I was running out of options, running out of gas, running out of hope. I slowed down, rolled to a stop about 20 feet from the figure. My headlights washed over it, and I saw something that made my mind want to reject what my eyes were showing me. It was me. The figure was me. Exact same height, same build, same jacket and work boots. Same face, though I could only see it in profile. It stood there staring at the burned oak tree, and it looked exactly like I would look if I were standing there instead of sitting in my truck. I sat frozen, hands locked on the steering wheel, breath coming in short gasps. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence. Just stood there, a perfect copy of me, staring at that tree. Then, without any transition or movement, I was standing outside my truck. I don't remember opening the door. Don't remember stepping out. But suddenly I was on the pavement, 20 feet from my idling vehicle, staring at the burned oak tree. And sitting in my truck, visible through the windshield, was another me. Hands on the steering wheel, eyes wide with fear, staring at me with the same horror I felt moments before. The confusion was overwhelming. Which one was I? Was I in the truck looking out? Was I outside looking in? Both perspectives felt equally real, equally mine. Then the version of me in the truck started to drive. The engine revved, the vehicle pulled away, leaving me standing beside the burned oak tree in the absolute darkness and silence. I tried to run after it, tried to scream, but no sound came out and my legs wouldn't move properly. I could only stand there and watch my own taillights disappear around the curve. Then everything snapped back. I was in my truck again, had always been in my truck. The steering wheel was solid under my hands. My foot was on the gas pedal. I was driving forward like I never stopped. But I could still feel the memory of standing outside, the cold night air, the rough asphalt under my boots, the absolute certainty that I had been left behind by my own vehicle. I don't know how long I drove after that. Time had become as unreliable as distance. The gas gauge stayed stuck in the red zone, needle hovering over empty, but the engine kept running. The night refused to end. The burned oak tree kept appearing, each version slightly different from the last. Then, without warning or ceremony, I was past it. Mile marker 18 appeared in my headlights. Then 19. Then 20. The road continued forward the way it was supposed to. The loop had released me as arbitrarily as it had caught me. I didn't question it. Didn't slow down. I drove the remaining distance home, going 20 miles over the speed limit, my heart hammering, my hands aching from gripping the wheel too tightly. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was just starting to rise. I'd been driving for 7 hours. 7 hours to cover 40 miles. My wife was asleep inside, unaware that anything unusual had happened. According to her, I texted that I'd be late, but she'd fallen asleep before I got home. Except I hadn't texted her. My phone had no signal all night. But there were the messages in my sent folder, timestamped throughout the evening, all saying I was fine and would be home soon. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't driven Highway 178 at night since. I take the long way home now, adding 40 minutes to my commute, circling wide around that stretch of road. But here is what keeps me awake, what makes me question everything I thought I understood about the world. Last week, I was looking at traffic cameras online, the kind the highway department uses to monitor road conditions. Just curious, just checking that stretch of highway during the day, in the safety of sunlight. And there, at mile marker 17, beside the burned oak tree, I saw a figure, distant and blurry on the low-resolution camera feed, but clearly visible, a person standing beside that tree, perfectly still, staring at it. The figure was wearing my jacket, my work boots, and though the image quality was poor, I could swear it had my face. I checked the timestamp. The image was live, current, happening right now in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. I've checked that camera feed every day since. Sometimes the figure is there. Sometimes it isn't. It never moves, never changes position, just stands beside that tree, a version of me trapped in that endless loop, still trying to find a way home. And every night when I lie in bed, I wonder if I actually made it out. If the version of me that is here, in this house, with this life, is the real one. Or if I am still out there on Highway 178, driving in circles, trapped in a night that never ends, while some copy of me lives my life and sleeps beside my wife and tries desperately to convince itself that everything is normal. The worst part is not knowing, never being able to know for certain. The road gave me no answers. The loop offered no explanation. I escaped, but I don't. Do you know what I escaped from, or if I truly escaped at all? Sometimes I catch myself driving on autopilot, and I'll look up to find I've recovered miles without any memory of the journey. Sometimes I'll check my GPS and see that I'm somewhere I shouldn't be. Sometimes the stars look wrong and the darkness feels too thick, and I wonder if I ever really left that 40-mile loop. Or if it simply expanded to include everything else. Calm situations can hide the deepest fear. Story 7. Motel on County Road 9. Something is wrong with my body right now, and I cannot move. That is not metaphorical. That is not me being dramatic or trying to grab your attention. I am literally unable to move my legs, and I am about to tell you why, because if I don't to explain this while I still remember the details, I think I might lose my mind entirely. My name is Robert Marin. I am 47 years old, a software engineer from Portland. And 3 days ago I experienced something so terrifying, so fundamentally wrong, that it has shattered my understanding of what reality actually is. It started on a Tuesday evening with nothing remarkable. I was driving home from a client meeting in Seattle, heading south on Highway 97. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone had died about an hour earlier, so I was navigating by memory, using the old landmarks I remembered from childhood trips down this road. The forest pressed in on both sides of the highway, towering firs and ancient pines creating a corridor of green that felt simultaneously beautiful and unsettling. That's when I noticed the sign. It was a motel advertisement, one of those old-style roadside markers you see much anymore. Faded red letters on a white background proclaimed, Riverside Rest Motel. Next exit, 5 miles. The sign was weathered, the paint peeling, but the message was clear. I was tired. I'd been driving for 6 hours. A motel seemed like exactly what I needed. I took the exit. The road descended away from the highway, winding through dense forest. No other cars, no other signs of civilization. Just trees and darkness and the crunch of gravel beneath my tires. The terrifying part is that I knew something was wrong during this drive, but my body wouldn't respond to the danger my mind was registering. My conscious mind screamed at me to turn around. Warning signals fired throughout my thoughts like an alarm system. Every instinct I possessed told me this was a mistake, that this road led nowhere good, that the darkness gathering between those trees was the kind of darkness that swallowed people. But my hand stayed on the wheel. My foot remained on the accelerator. My body moved forward as if operating on autopilot, divorced from my panicking thoughts. This detachment, this horrible separation between my mind and my flesh, should have terrified me more than anything else. But I couldn't. The excess real terror. The fear was muted, distant, like watching something scary in a movie where you re-aware it's not real. Only my intellect confirmed how unreal, how fundamentally wrong this entire situation felt. After 3 miles, the motel appeared. It was exactly what a nightmare version of a 1960s roadside motel would look like. A long, single-story building painted a sickly cream color, with individual room doors spaced along a covered walkway. The sign out front was the same vintage style as the highway marker, reading, Riverside Rest, in those same faded red letters. A small office building sat at the far end, its windows dark. The creepy thing was the cleanliness. Despite its obvious age, the motel wasn't deteriorating. There was no graffiti, no broken windows, no visible decay. It was maintained, cared for. Someone was keeping this place presentable, which made its appearance even more disturbing because it suggested an ongoing, active operation. Yet there were no cars in the parking lot, no lights in any of the windows, no sign of human presence whatsoever. My body moved toward the office. I wasn't consciously deciding to do this. I was watching myself, trapped in my own flesh, as my hand opened the car door and my legs carried me across the parking lot toward that dark building. The horror of it was that I could observe myself making these decisions without being able to stop them. My mouth opened. My hand reached for the office door. My fingers turned the knob. The door was unlocked. Inside the office was a small lobby. Behind a counter sat an old television, silent and dark. The floor was linoleum, clean, with a pattern of tiny blue diamonds. On the wall behind the counter hung a board with keys, room numbers above each hook. Every single room had its key present. That is when the first wave of real dread hit me. If every room was available, if this motel was accepting guests, where was the clerk? I stood there, unable to call out, unable to turn around and leave, simply waiting. Then a door behind the counter opened, and a figure emerged. The man was tall, impossibly thin, wearing clothes that looked authentically vintage but wrong somehow. His movements were too smooth, almost gliding rather than walking. When he looked at me, I understood immediately that I knew something was fundamentally wrong, but my consciousness couldn't fully process what I was seeing. His face was familiar, exactly familiar, too familiar. It was my face, not similar, not like a long-lost relative or a doppelganger. It was literally my face, down to the small scar above my left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the slight asymmetry of my jaw, the exact shade of my gray-streaked hair. But the eyes were different. His eyes were empty in a way that suggested nothing lived behind them. I knew something was profoundly wrong, but my body remained completely calm. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed even. The fear I should have experienced was trapped somewhere in my skull, unable to reach my physical form. I was frozen in a state of muted terror while this thing that wore my face moved behind the counter and slid a registration card toward me. My hand picked up a pen. My hand filled out the form. Room 12. The key dropped into my palm. The walk to room 12 felt infinite. The covered walkway stretched longer than it should have. The doors I passed seemed to multiply, extending far beyond what the building, this footprint, should have allowed. The darkness was complete except for a single buzzing fluorescent light above my assigned room's entrance. That eerie light attracted insects, and they swarmed around it in agitated patterns. My key turned the lock. The room was impeccable. A queen bed with a cream-colored bedspread. A television on a dresser. Walls painted the same sickly cream as the exterior. A bathroom door on the left. Everything was clean, dust-free, impossibly perfect for a motel that appeared abandoned. But the truly terrifying part was the mirror. Across from the bed hung a large mirror, and when I looked into it, I saw not myself but that same man with my face. He was standing directly behind me, his mouth moving silently, as if he was trying to communicate something. When I turned around, the room was empty. I knew something was hideously wrong, but the knowledge existed in a kind of intellectual space, separated from my ability to physically react. I wasn't hyperventilating. I wasn't trying to run. I was simply sitting on the edge of the bed, watching my hands rest calmly on my thighs, while some distant part of my consciousness screamed in a voice I couldn't hear. That night, I didn't sleep. Or rather, I don't remember sleeping, though hours passed. The clock on the nightstand moved from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but the progression felt instantaneous. One moment I was sitting on the bed in darkness. The next the room was filled with gray morning light, and I somehow transferred to lying under the covers. When I got out of bed, my body moved normally again. The walking was easy, the thinking was clear, but something fundamental had shifted. I understood, with absolute certainty, that I was no longer in my own body. Or rather, I was in my body. But so was something else. There was a presence sharing my flesh, controlling my movements, wearing my skin like a suit it had learned to wear perfectly. I tried to scream. My throat produced only a normal human voice asking for coffee in the office. The thing in my body walked to the office. The clerk stood behind the counter, and I realized now that he was me as well. Or rather, he was what happened when you completely hollowed out, when the person inside has been completely replaced. The other me offered a key to a room with a knowing expression. The terrifying realization crashed through me. There were multiple versions, multiple rooms, multiple stolen bodies in this motel. Each one a person who had checked in and been replaced by whatever inhabited this place. As I walked back to room 12, I looked through the windows of the other rooms. In each window, I saw variations of people. A woman with blonde hair that I somehow knew was named Sarah. A man with a beard who had to be someone named Marcus. They were all going about the routines of their new existence in this chilling place, all moving with that same too smooth quality, all wearing the empty expressions of people who had been completely consumed. That is when I understood the horror of my situation. I was still conscious, still trapped inside my own meat prison while something else wore my body like a suit. I was a passenger in my own existence, observing everything, unable to stop any of it. The other versions in those rooms might still be conscious too. We might all be screaming silently from inside these stolen bodies, unable to access the primal fear our minds were experiencing. I somehow broke the connection later that afternoon. I didn't fully understand how it happened. I was lying on the bed, and something inside me forced my hand to move against the will of whatever was controlling me. The action was jerky, uncoordinated, like my conscious mind was trying to wrestle control from the entity inhabiting my body. The effort was exhausting, like trying to move through water. My conscious self managed to drag my body to the car. The thing controlling me tried to stop me, but that moment of genuine conflict seemed to weaken its hold. I got in the vehicle. I drove away from the motel. Behind me, I saw that other me step out of the office, watching me leave with an expression of something like sadness or disappointment. I drove for hours before I could fully access control of my body again. The parking lot of a hospital in Salem was where I finally regained complete autonomy. I'd been here for 3 days, undergoing every test known to modern medicine. Blood work, MRI scans, psychiatric evaluations, everything comes back normal. The doctors find nothing wrong with me physically or mentally. But here, it's the thing that keeps me imprisoned in this hospital bed, the reason I cannot move my legs even now despite all the tests showing they read perfectly functional. I can feel it still inside me. It is not trying to control me anymore. It's dormant, waiting, as if satisfied to simply inhabit the same space as my consciousness. Sometimes I feel it shifting in the deep places of my mind, and I know that the boundary between us is porous. One moment, I might lose myself completely, and then it could wear my body while I'm trapped in the dark, screaming without sound. The most terrifying aspect is this. I've been watching the news. There's a story about a motel on County Road 9 that burned down last night. 'Cause unknown. When firefighters explored the wreckage, They found nothing. No bodies, no remains, just empty rooms arranged in an impossible layout, far more rooms than the building, its dimensions could have physically contained. But before the fire, several people checked into that motel over the past week. A woman named Sarah, a man named Marcus, a woman named Jennifer, and possibly others. None of them have returned home. Their cars are still parked in the lot, undamaged by the fire. The part that is keeping me paralyzed with this specific, muted, distant fear is the knowledge that those bodies are still out there. Still wearing the stolen lives of their hosts. Still walking among normal people, learning to smile correctly, learning to maintain the appearance of humanity. And whatever is inside me is connected to them. I can feel the network, the hive consciousness, the hungry awareness of multiple stolen bodies moving through the world, learning, adapting, preparing. My doctor thinks my paralysis is psychosomatic, a manifestation of trauma. He doesn't understand that I'm keeping myself immobilized on purpose. If I move, if I resume my normal life and return to society, the thing inside me will seize that opportunity. It will use my freedom to move among people I care about. So I stay here, frozen, paralyzed not by physical limitation but by the knowledge that the moment I regain the ability to pretend normalcy, the entity inside my flesh will finally have everything it needs. The chilling truth is that I am not the only aware person in a body anymore. And there are more bodies at other motels, waiting, preparing, growing stronger in the darkness of their stolen minds. Story 8. Watchers in apartment 4B. What is more terrifying than something happening? Nothing happening at all. That's what I learned during 3 weeks in apartment 4B, and why I'll never fully trust silence again. I am a property manager in Portland, Oregon. 41 years old, practical, skeptical by nature. I deal with broken pipes and noise complaints, not ghosts or urban legends. But what happened at the Riverside Apartments last November broke something in me. The scary part wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't see, what never came. The horrifying absence of any explanation for the fear that consumed me. The building was built in 1974. Nothing special. 4 stories, 32 units, the kind of place where young professionals and retirees live side by side without much interaction. I managed the property for 6 years without incident. Then Mrs. Chen from 4B moved out suddenly, leaving 2 months on her lease. She was 83, sharp as a tack, lived there for 15 years. When I asked why she was leaving, she just shook her head and said the place wasn't right anymore. She wouldn't elaborate, paid the penalty without argument, and was gone within a day. That should have been my first warning. Mrs. Chen wasn't the type to run from anything. But I had a vacancy to fill, so I cleaned the apartment and listed it immediately. The unit was pristine, hardwood floors, updated kitchen, a view of the Willamette River. It should have rented in days, except no one would take it. I showed the apartment 11 times in 2 weeks. Every single person seemed interested at first, then made excuses and left quickly. One couple didn't even finish the tour. They just looked at each other in the living room and told me they changed their minds. The woman was pale, almost shaking. Her husband pulled her out fast. By week 3, I was frustrated and confused. There was nothing wrong with the apartment. Nothing visible, anyway. So I decided to stay there myself for a few nights, see if I could figure out what was driving people away. Maybe there was a smell I grown nose blind to, or a sound from the pipes. Something fixable, something rational. I moved in on a Tuesday evening, brought an air mattress, some blankets, my laptop. The apartment was empty except for the fixtures Mrs. Chen had left behind. Curtains, overhead lights, the refrigerator. I set up in the living room, ordered pizza, and settled in for what I assumed would be a boring couple of nights, proving there was nothing wrong. The unsettling feeling started within the first hour. Not anything specific, just a creeping sense that something was off. The apartment felt too still, too quiet, even for an empty space. The air had a weight to it, like pressure before a storm. I told myself it was just the strangeness of sleeping in an unfamiliar place, even though I'd been in this unit dozens of times before. Around 10 p.m., I noticed the shadows. The streetlight outside cast long shapes across the living room floor, and I found myself watching them. Not because they were moving or doing anything unusual. They weren't. They just sat there, perfectly still, perfectly normal, but I couldn't stop looking at them. My attention kept getting pulled back, like something in my peripheral vision was demanding I pay attention. I forced myself to focus on my laptop, checking emails, browsing mindlessly. But the awareness of those shadows never left. They pressed on my consciousness like a weight, an itch I couldn't scratch. The eerie sensation grew stronger as the night deepened. Nothing happened. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Nothing happened. No strange noises, no flickering lights, no cold spots or mysterious figures. Just me, sitting in an empty apartment, feeling increasingly anxious for no reason I could identify. By midnight, I was wide awake despite being exhausted. My heart rate was elevated, my muscles tense, my breathing shallow. Every instinct screamed that I was in danger, but there was nothing to be afraid of. The apartment was silent. The building was quiet. Everything was completely, utterly normal. Except it wasn't. Somehow, it absolutely wasn't. The fear wasn't coming from outside. It was seeping from the walls themselves, from the floor, from the very air. An oppressive dread that had no source and no explanation. I turned on all the lights. That helped a little, pushing back the shadows, making the space feel less threatening. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, the sensation intensified. The feeling of being watched, being waited for, being the subject of attention from something I couldn't see or hear or understand. The night crawled by. I sat on my air mattress, lights blazing, watching nothing happen. Watching emptiness, watching silence, and feeling more terrified with each passing hour. When dawn finally came, the feeling didn't lift. If anything, it grew stronger. The morning light revealed nothing wrong. No signs of intrusion. No evidence of anything unusual. Just an empty apartment that felt fundamentally wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I should have left. Looking back, I wish I had. But I'm stubborn, and I needed to understand. So I stayed. The second night was worse. The anticipation was already there from the moment the sun set, that crawling dread settling over me like a blanket. I tried to work, tried to distract myself, but my attention kept drifting to the corners of rooms, to the space beneath the breakfast bar, to the closed bathroom door. Something was building. I could feel it, not approaching, not growing, just building, like pressure increasing in a sealed container, inevitable and terrifying. But nothing manifested. Nothing appeared. Nothing happened. Around 2 a.m., I realized I hadn't blinked in several minutes. I was sitting frozen on the air mattress, staring at the hallway that led to the bedroom, my eyes burning, my body rigid. I had no idea how long I had been like that. Time felt distorted, unreliable. Minutes stretched into hours or compressed into seconds. I forced myself to blink, to move, to do something to break the spell. I stood up and walked around the apartment, turning on every light, opening every door, checking every closet. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Just empty rooms and that suffocating sense of wrongness that defied explanation. The disturbing realization hit me then. I wasn't waiting for something to happen. Something was waiting for me. Waiting for what? I didn't know. But the patience was palpable, heavy, like a predator that had all the time in the world. I tried to rationalize it. Carbon monoxide? I checked the detector. Working fine. Infrasound? Some frequency below human hearing that causes anxiety? Maybe. But that didn't explain the focused, intentional quality of the fear. This wasn't random panic. It was specific, directed, personal. By the third night, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept more than an hour total. Every shadow had become a potential threat. Every moment of silence felt loaded with menace. And still, nothing happened. No event, no encounter, no climax to the building tension. It's when I started noticing the apartment, its behavior. Small things that shouldn't have meant anything but somehow did. The way dust didn't settle in certain corners. The way the refrigerator's hum seemed to pause when I entered the kitchen, then resume when I left. The way the water from the tap ran slightly cloudy, then clear, then cloudy again in a pattern that felt almost like breathing. None of these things were supernatural. They all had mundane explanations. But together, they created an impression of something alive, something aware, something waiting. I started talking out loud, just to fill the silence, narrating what I was doing, making jokes to myself, anything to create sound and break that oppressive quiet. But my voice sounded flat in the apartment, absorbed by the walls, dying quickly without the normal echoes and reverberations you'd expect. On the fourth night, I broke. Not from anything that happened, but from the accumulated weight of nothing happening. The expectation had become unbearable. I was so tense, so primed for horror, that the continued absence of any event was more disturbing than any haunting could have been. I packed my things at 3 a.m. and left. I didn't to run, didn't to panic, just calmly gathered my belongings and walked out. The relief I felt stepping into the hallway was physical, like surfacing from deep water. The normal sounds of the building, the hum of the elevator, the distant murmur of a television from another unit, were beautiful. Real, safe. I sealed the apartment the next morning. Not officially, not legally, but I stopped showing it. Told my supervisor it needed extensive work, bought myself time to figure out what to do. I researched the building, its history, looking for deaths, tragedies, anything that might explain the presence in 4B. Nothing. No murders, no suicides, no accidents. The apartment had been unremarkable for 40 years. Mrs. Chen was the longest tenant. Before her, there'd been normal turnover, normal residents living normal lives. Nothing in the building, as past explained what I experienced. Except when I dug deeper, I found a pattern. Every tenant in 4B eventually left before their lease was up. Not immediately, usually after several months, but they all left early. No complaints, no explanations, just quiet departures. Going back to 1974, every single one. The average occupancy was 8 months. Mrs. Chen's 15 years was the anomaly. When I called her, planning to ask about her experience, she hung up as soon as I mentioned the apartment number. I tried twice more. She blocked my number. I talked to a few former tenants I managed to track down. Most didn't want to discuss it. One man finally admitted he felt uncomfortable there but couldn't say why. Nothing had happened to him. He'd just grown increasingly anxious until he couldn't take it anymore. Another woman said she started having nightmares, but they were vague, formless things she couldn't remember upon waking. Just fear with no content. Nothing happened to any of them. That was the consistent thread. No attacks, no apparitions, no concrete incidents. Just a growing, inexplicable dread that drove them away. I tried to convince myself it was psychological. Mass hysteria, suggestion, the power of expectation. But I felt it before knowing anything was wrong. That fear was real, primal, impossible to dismiss as imagination. The apartment has been empty for 9 months now. They told management it has mold issues that require extensive remediation. They believe me because I've never lied before, because I'm reliable, practical, the last person to make up problems. But eventually, they want proof. Eventually, they force me to rent it again or explain why I can I don't. Do you know what I'll tell them? How do you explain that a place is terrifying when nothing happens there? How do you convince people that absence can be more disturbing than presence? That waiting is worse than any monster could be? Sometimes I drive past the building and look up at the 4th floor. The windows of 4B are dark, but there is something about them. A quality of darkness that is deeper than the absence of light. I know logically that it is just my memory, my fear, projecting meaning onto nothing. But I also know what I felt in that apartment. I know something is in there, or maybe the apartment itself is something. Something patient. Something that doesn't need to act because its mere existence is enough. The most chilling part? I still don't know what I was waiting for. What would have happened if I stayed another night? Another week? Would it have eventually done something? Or was the waiting itself the point? Was I supposed to break, to run, to give it whatever it feeds on? Or was I supposed to stay, to give in, to become part of whatever presence fills that space? I'll never know. And that uncertainty is its own special nightmare, one that wakes me up at odd hours, one that makes me second guess every quiet room I enter. Because now I know that horror doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits in the corner, patient and invisible, doing absolutely nothing. And somehow, that is the most terrifying thing of all. Nothing happened in apartment 4B. Nothing at all. And I'll spend the rest of my life wondering why that was so much worse than if something had. Some experiences never feel real, even afterward. Story 9. Rest stop on mile 168. Do you know what it feels like when reality starts peeling away at the edges? When the world around you becomes too quiet, too still, like you They step through an invisible membrane into somewhere that only pretends to be real. I found that place on Interstate 90 at mile marker 168, and I'm still not sure I ever fully came back. I am a long-haul trucker, been driving routes across Montana and Wyoming for 19 years. 53 years old, divorced, no kids. The road is my life, and I know every truck stop, every rest area, every dangerous curve between Billings and Bozeman. Or at least I thought I did. But the rest stop at mile 168 appeared one night in October, and nothing has been quite right since. It was 2:30 in the morning when my headlights caught the sign. Blue with white letters, standard highway marker indicating a rest area half a mile ahead. Nothing unusual about it except I'd never seen it before, and I'd driven this exact stretch of highway hundreds of times. But exhaustion makes you doubt your memory, so I figured I just missed it before. My eyes were burning, my back ached, and I needed to stretch my legs. The next official stop was 40 miles out. This would do. The exit ramp curved through darkness so complete it felt solid, like driving through black paint. My headlights seemed dimmer somehow, struggling to penetrate the night. The trees on either side weren't the usual pines. They were bare, skeletal, their branches twisted in ways that didn't look natural. Dead things reaching toward the sky like clawed hands. The rest stop itself was small. Just a parking lot, a single bathroom building, and a covered picnic area with concrete tables. One flickering streetlight cast weak yellow light over the cracked pavement. My truck, its engine sounded wrong as I pulled in. The rumble distorted like I was hearing it underwater. That should have been my warning. That unsettling wrongness that made my stomach clench. But I was tired, and tired makes you stupid. I killed the engine and climbed down from the cab. The silence hit me immediately. Not peaceful quiet, but the terrifying absence of sound that feels intentional. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic hum from the interstate. Nothing, just dead air that pressed against my eardrums like pressure underwater. The bathroom building was cinderblock painted institutional beige, the kind you see at every rest stop across America. But the paint looked faded in a way that suggested decades, not years. Rust streaked down from the roofline. The metal door hung slightly crooked. A sign reading, restrooms, had letters that looked hand-painted, old-fashioned, nothing like the modern printed signs you see everywhere now. I pulled the door open. The hinges didn't creak. They should have, rusty as they were, but they made no sound at all. That eerie silence swallowed everything. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a frequency that made my teeth ache. The bulbs were ancient tubes, not modern fixtures, casting a sickly green tint over the tile walls. Everything was clean but wrong. Too clean, maybe. No graffiti, no trash, no signs of the thousands of travelers who should have used this place over the years. The mirrors above the sinks were spotted and warped, reflecting images that didn't quite match reality. I looked older in them, more haggard, my eyes sunken and dark. I splashed cold water on my face. The water felt thick, viscous, taking too long to slide off my skin. When I looked up, my reflection moved a half-second behind me. Just a fraction of delay, but enough to notice. Enough to make my heart start racing. I left the bathroom quickly, trying to shake off the creeping dread. This place was getting to me. Just an old, neglected rest stop. Nothing scary about that, but my rational mind couldn't quite convince my instincts, which were screaming at me to get back in my truck and leave. That's when I noticed the picnic tables from the parking lot. They looked normal enough. Up close, I could see the details. Names and dates carved into the wood, hundreds of them, covering every surface. But the dates were wrong. They ranged from 1952 to last week, all mixed together with no pattern. And the names, I recognized some of them from trucker forums I read online. Drivers who'd gone missing over the years, last seen on roads through Montana. Their names were here, carved in weathered wood that should have rotted decades ago. My hands started shaking. The fear was real now, primal, the kind that bypasses logic and goes straight to survival instinct. I needed to leave, immediately, but when I turned back to my truck, reality felt thin there. That's the only way I could describe it. The world seemed translucent, like I could almost see through it to something else underneath. The air shimmered with a quality that had nothing to do with heat. Time felt stretched, each second lasting too long. My movements sluggish and dreamlike. I forced myself forward, each step an effort, like wading through invisible resistance. My truck looked strange from this angle, the proportions slightly off, the colors muted. The distance to it seemed to change as I walked, growing longer instead of shorter. Then I heard the sound. Not heard, exactly, felt it, vibrating through my bones. A low-frequency hum that came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in my chest cavity, making my vision blur. The parking lot began to shift, the edges becoming uncertain. The trees in the surrounding darkness moved closer, though I never saw them actually move. They were just suddenly nearer, their twisted branches reaching toward me. Panic took over. I ran for my truck, stumbling on pavement that felt soft under my boots, like running on foam rubber. My hand touched the door handle and it was ice cold, burning my palm. I yanked the door open and hauled myself up into the cab. The engine wouldn't start. I turned the key again and again, my breath coming in gasps, that horrible hum growing louder, pressing against my skull from the inside. Through the windshield, I watched the bathroom building age before my eyes. Paint peeling, walls crumbling, rust spreading like disease. The picnic tables collapsed into splinters. The streetlight flickered and died. On the 7th try, the engine caught. I didn't wait for it to warm up, just slammed it into gear and accelerated toward the exit. The truck lurched forward, and reality snapped back like a rubber band. Suddenly, everything was normal again. The bathroom building stood intact. The picnic tables were whole. The streetlight glowed steadily, but I didn't stop to question it. I just drove. The exit ramp back to the interstate seemed longer than it should have been, winding through those dead trees for what felt like miles. My speedometer said I was doing 60, but it felt like crawling. The darkness pressed in on all sides, absolute and hungry. When I finally merged back onto I-90, the change was immediate and jarring. Traffic appeared around me, other trucks and cars moving at normal speeds. Lights from distant buildings dotted the landscape. The world was alive again, real again, solid again, but I felt disconnected from it, like I was watching through glass. I drove straight through to Bozeman without stopping. 5 more hours with my hands locked on the wheel and my eyes burning. When I finally pulled into a truck stop I knew, a place I'd been to dozens of times, I sat in the cab for 20 minutes before I could make myself get out. Everything looked right, but it didn't feel right. Reality had a fragile quality now, like it could tear open at any moment and reveal something horrible underneath. I checked the mile markers obsessively for the rest of that run. There was no marker 168. The numbers jumped from 167 to 169, the way they always had. No rest area, no exit, nothing, like the place I'd stopped had never existed at all. But when I got home 3 days later, I found things in my truck I didn't remember putting there. A handful of wood splinters in my jacket pocket, smelling of rotten age. Rust stains on my palms that wouldn't wash off for a week. And on the passenger seat, a piece of paper with names and dates written in handwriting that looked like mine but wasn't. My name was there, next to yesterday's date. The disturbing part isn't what happened at that rest stop. It's what's been happening since. Reality feels thin everywhere now. Not constantly, but in moments. I'll be driving and suddenly the road ahead will shimmer, becoming uncertain. I'll be in a diner and the other customers will seem slightly translucent, like shadows pretending to be people. Time stutters sometimes, jumping forward or back by seconds. And always, there is that sense of something underneath. Something I can almost perceive if I look at the world from the corner of my eye. Other truckers have started mentioning strange rest stops on the forums I frequent. Places that appear and disappear, locations that don't match any map. They describe the same feeling I experienced, that horrifying thinness of reality, like the world is just a sheet of paper that could tear. Some of them have stopped driving. Others, like me, keep going because we don't know what else to do. Last week, I saw the sign again. Mile marker 168, indicating a rest area half a mile ahead. It was daylight this time, mid-afternoon on a clear day. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know. I took the exit. The rest stop was there, looking exactly as it had that night. But empty now, abandoned, ancient. The bathroom building was a ruin. Walls collapsed, roof caved in. The picnic tables were nothing but rotted wood and rust. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds. It looked like it had been abandoned for 50 years. Except for one thing. On the least damaged picnic table, freshly carved, were dozens of new names. People I knew, people from my life, my ex-wife, my dispatcher, my brother, all dated within the last month. And at the bottom of the list, carved deeper than the rest, was my name again. With today, is date, I left without getting out of my truck, drove back to the interstate with my heart hammering and my hands shaking. When I reached the highway, I looked back. The exit was already fading, becoming transparent, less real. In another moment, it was gone completely, and I was just another truck on I-90, heading east toward the sunrise. But I know it is still there. I know that thin place exists, waiting at mile marker 168, where reality peels away and something else bleeds through. I know that somehow, by stopping there, I became marked, connected to it. And I know, with a certainty that terrifies me, that eventually I'll see that exit one more time. And when I do, I want to be able to drive past it. Something will pull me in, and this time I want to come back. I'll join all those other names carved in rotting wood, trapped in a place where reality is thin and time doesn't to work right, where the world is just a sick dream that something else is dreaming. The nightmare ISM, what happened at that rest stop. It's knowing it's waiting for me. Knowing reality is fragile. Knowing that anywhere, at any time, the world might peel back and show me what's really underneath. And once you've seen behind the curtain, once you've felt how thin everything truly is, you can never quite believe in the solidity of anything again. I still drive I-90. I still pass through Montana. And every time I approach that section of highway, my hands sweat and my stomach clenches and I watch the mile markers climb. 165, 166, 167, then 169. Always jumping, always skipping, but I know it's there. Mile 168 exists in the spaces between, in that thin place where reality doesn't quite hold together. And someday, it won T-skip. Someday that exit will be there waiting, and I'll take it. Because deep down, in a part of myself to want to acknowledge I've been marked. I belong there now, in that place where everything feels thin, where time and space dawn to work right, where the world reveals itself as the fragile dream it has always been. The final story brings everything together. Story 10. It didn't feel real until it was over. I still check my rearview mirror more than I should. Even now, parked in my own driveway with the doors locked and the porch light on, I catch myself looking. Waiting, because some things follow you home, and you never really know they're there until it's too late. It started 3 months ago on Interstate 40, somewhere between Albuquerque and Amarillo. Middle of nowhere, the kind of highway that stretches so far you forget what state you're in. I drive that route for work every few weeks, hauling equipment for construction sites. It is boring, mostly. Long hours alone with nothing but talk radio and gas station coffee keeping me awake. That night was supposed to be like any other. The first strange thing was so small I almost didn't notice it. A rest stop around 2 in the morning. One of those sad concrete buildings with vending machines and fluorescent lights that hum too loud. I pulled in because my eyes were getting heavy, and I needed to stretch my legs. The parking lot was empty except for one other car. An old sedan, tan or beige, the kind you forget the second you look away. I went inside, used the bathroom, grabbed a candy bar from the machine. The whole time, I had this creepy feeling in my gut, like someone was watching me. But every time I turned around, the place was empty. Just me and those buzzing lights and the smell of industrial cleaner. I told myself it was nothing. Just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. When I walked back outside, the other car was gone. And that should have been fine. Normal, even. People come and go at rest stops. But here is the thing that made my skin crawl. My truck was parked in a different spot. Not by much, maybe 2 spaces over. I stood there in the darkness, staring at it, trying to convince myself I was wrong. That I'd just forgotten where I parked. But I never forget. 20 years of driving. I always remember. I got in, locked the doors, checked the back seat 3 times even though I could see it was empty. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved inside. But something felt off. The air felt different, heavier, like someone had been sitting in the passenger seat, breathing, waiting. I should have driven straight home. Called it a night, but I had a deadline, and I was already behind schedule. So I kept going. Highway 40 stretched ahead of me like a black ribbon, and I pushed the gas pedal down, trying to outrun the unsettling feeling crawling up my spine. For the next hour, everything seemed normal. Then I saw the headlights behind me. High beams, bright enough to hurt. They appeared out of nowhere, maybe half a mile back, and they were coming up fast. Too fast. I moved to the right lane to let them pass. But they didn't. To pass. They slowed down, matched my speed exactly, stayed right behind me with those blinding lights burning into my mirrors. I sped up. They sped up. I slowed down. They slowed down. My heart started hammering in my chest. And suddenly the highway felt too empty. Too dark. There were no other cars. No exits for miles. Just me and whoever was behind me, playing some horrifying game I didn't understand. I tried to get a look at the vehicle, but the lights were too bright. All I could see was a dark shape. Could have been a truck. Could have been a van. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every horror story I ever heard about highway killers flooded my mind. People who follow truckers. People who run you off the road in the middle of nowhere and leave no witnesses. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the headlights were gone. I looked in my mirror. Nothing. Empty road. My heart was still racing, but I told myself it was over. Whoever it was had turned off somewhere. Taken an exit I hadn't noticed. I was alone again, except I wasn't. That is when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A faint scratching noise coming from somewhere behind me. From the sleeper cab. I checked it before. I knew it was empty, but the sound was there. Soft, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across fabric. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over, but pulling over felt more dangerous than keeping my foot on the gas. So I drove, eyes locked on the road ahead, trying to convince myself it was just cargo shifting. Just the wind, just my imagination running wild. The scratching stopped. And that was worse, because now I was listening, straining to hear anything over the engine noise and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The silence felt alive, waiting. I made it to the next town just as the sun started rising. A small place called Glen Rio, half in Texas, half in New Mexico, mostly abandoned now, but there was a gas station still open, and I pulled in fast, tires screeching. I jumped out, checked the entire truck, every inch, the cab, the storage, under the seats, nothing, absolutely nothing. The attendant, an older man with tired eyes, watched me through the window. When I went inside to pay, he asked if I was all right. I must have looked insane, pale, shaking. I told him I thought someone had been following me. He nodded slowly, like he heard this before. He said something that still haunts me. He said people disappear on that stretch of highway all the time. Not many, just enough that the local cops have a file. Truckers mostly, people traveling alone. They find the vehicles eventually. Parked at rest stops, pulled over on the shoulder, empty, keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, just gone. I left Glen Rio and drove straight home. Didn't stop except for gas. Kept my doors locked, checked my mirrors constantly. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just a scary coincidence, a creepy night that would make a good story someday. But then the little things started, things I couldn't explain, things that didn't feel real but were happening anyway. I did find my truck parked in different spots than where I left it, just a few feet off. I did come out in the morning, and the mirrors would be adjusted wrong. The seat would be moved back even though I live alone. I started taking pictures, documenting everything, trying to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. One night, I found footprints in the dust on my driveway. They led from the street to my truck, then to my front door, then back to the street. But they weren't my footprints. Too small, too narrow. I called the police. They came out, took a report, said it was probably just someone casing houses. Told me to install security cameras. I did. 3 of them, front door, driveway, backyard, and that is when things got truly disturbing. The cameras would cut out. Not all at once, just for a few minutes here and there. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. The footage would skip. 1 second, everything is normal. Next second, hours have passed. When I contacted the company, they said there was nothing wrong with the system. No technical issues, no explanation. I started staying awake, sitting in my living room with the lights off, watching the driveway through the window. Waiting. On the 3rd night, I saw it. Movement near my truck. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness. It moved like a person. It moved wrong. Too smooth. Too deliberate. Like it was gliding. I grabbed my phone. My hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. By the time I got the flashlight app turned on and pointed it outside, the shadow was gone. But my truck door was open. I know I locked it. I always lock it. I check it 3 times every night. I didn't go outside. I called the police again. They came out again, checked everything, found nothing. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes, pulled me aside. She asked if I'd been sleeping okay, if I'd been under a lot of stress. She gave me a card for a therapist. I knew what she was thinking, that I was paranoid, seeing things, but I wasn't, because the next morning, I found something in my truck, sitting on the passenger seat, something that proved I wasn't too crazy. A candy bar wrapper, the same kind I bought at that rest stop 3 months ago. Except I'd thrown that wrapper away in the trash can outside the bathroom. I remember doing it. That is when I understood. Whatever had been at that rest stop, whatever had followed me on the highway, whatever had been in my truck, it was still here, still watching, still waiting. I started researching, spent hours online looking up stories about Interstate 40, about disappearances, about things that hunt people on lonely highways. And I found others, people with similar experiences. They described the same feeling, the same small, wrong details, the sense that something was following them, waiting for the right moment. Most of them stopped posting after a while. Their accounts went silent, and I can stop wondering where they went. If they okay, or if whatever was following them finally got what it wanted. I done to drive that route anymore. I quit my job, found work closer to home. But it doesn't matter, because the feeling never left. That creepy sensation that I am being watched, that something is waiting. I see that shadow sometimes, in my peripheral vision, in my rearview mirror, in the darkness outside my bedroom window. Nothing dramatic has happened. I am still here, still alive, still going through my normal routine. But everything feels wrong now, like reality shifted slightly and I'm the only one who noticed. Like I'm waiting for something terrible to happen, and the waiting is worse than anything else. The worst part is the dreams. Every night, I am back at that rest stop, walking to my truck, and every night, I see something sitting in the driver's seat. Something dark, something that shouldn't exist. It turns to look at me, and I wake up before I can see its face. I know how this sounds. I know people think I'm paranoid, losing it, but I'm not. Because 3 days ago, I found another candy bar wrapper, same kind, sitting on my kitchen counter, and I haven't been to a gas station in weeks. It didn't feel real until it was over, except it's not over. It never ended. Whatever started that night on Interstate 40 is still happening, still building, still waiting, and I think I finally understand. The people who disappeared, they weren't taken. They were chosen, marked, followed, until the moment when reality and nightmare finally merged together. I am writing this down because I need someone to know, to understand, in case something happens, in case I become another name in a file that nobody reads. Another vehicle found empty on the side of some forgotten highway. The scratching sound is back. I can hear it now, coming from my bedroom. Soft, patient, like fingernails on fabric. And I know with absolute certainty. When I turn around, when I look, I am finally going to see what has been following me. But I can move, to breathe, because some part of me understands. Some horrifying, instinctive part of my brain knows. The moment I acknowledge it, the moment I truly see it, that is when it becomes real. That is when the waiting ends. That is when everything I've been running from finally catches up. The scratching is getting louder.